I moved to Dublin in August 2016. I'd lived in Galway for 10 years and then spent a year in Spain before returning to Ireland. I lived with my parents in the Midlands for 2 months, but found that to be difficult. I sent dozens of emails, and after a few weeks and a few trips up for interviews, I had a job in Dublin. Trying to save for a deposit, I realised my paycheck from my job alone wasn't going to cut it. So I found another job on the weekends. I worked every single day for a month. At the end of it, had over €2,000. I was expecting to spend about half of that on a room. I started responding to ads on daft.ie. I must have contacted about 200 people. I remember one of the places I looked at had over 22,000 views in the month that had been up on the site. Eventually I found a place, and for fear of letting it slip, I offered to pay an extra €60 a month more on top of what it was being advertised for. I offered this even before I'd seen the room for fear of losing it. It didn't last. When I moved into the house, I was warned that the landlord had vaguely mentioned a few months before he was thinking about selling up. The people next door shared the same landlord as us. About 6 or 7 months in, I found that all of our neighbours were being told to leave because the landlord was selling the house. A few weeks later, I went to the doctor's. I told him how stressed I was about my housing situation and asked if maybe he could refer me to somebody for counselling my anxiety. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor of his office being picked up by ambulance men. I'd fainted for the first time in my life. The diagnosis was simply extreme stress. Inevitably, the axe fell a month later. The landlord gave us 7 weeks to find a new place. To be fair to him, it was more than he was legally obliged to. But on the other hand, he told us we were being evicted one day after we'd paid him the rent, making it harder for us to get a deposit for a new place. I saw another dozen or so houses. In one of them, a woman from Costa Rica showed me a garage at the back of an abandoned house that had been divided in half with a hard plastic screen to create 2 rooms. I was fairly desperate, but I passed on that one. I felt so angry, so betrayed by my own country. I was working full-time and paying tax and was being reduced to this simply because I couldn't afford a decent place to live. I felt like a failure, being told I was unworthy and didn't deserve to live here.
I moved back to Ireland from the UK in March of 2017, fiancé in tow, hoping to escape the mess of Brexit. Through some connections and favours owed, we managed to get a 1-bedroom flat to rent. We were very lucky. The following months were full of hardship, as my fiancé couldn't find work, and I was unable to due to mental illness. We lived on our rapidly diminishing savings with no income and frequented the food bank. I was eventually awarded disability allowance, but it was too late. The relationship didn't survive the stress. In January of this year, my now ex left, and with her went the increase for a partner on my disability allowance. Suddenly, the rent was 60% of my income. I went to the Citizens Information Service, where they gave me forms to apply for rent supplement and assured me I would qualify. I immediately got to work filling in the forms and made an appointment to see the welfare officer. She told me the rent supplement didn't exist anymore. I had to apply for HAP. The work I'd done was for nothing. She was kind enough to let me out the back door, so I didn't have to go back through the waiting room in tears. During this time, I was reliant on the food bank for survival and couldn't afford to turn on the hot water or the heating. I spent the whole winter making hot water bottles, wrapping myself in blankets and moving as little as possible to conserve body heat.
I was living down the country for a while, but I wanted to return to Dublin to be close to family and friends, so we decided to move home. I could not believe how hard it was to get a viewing, even with the amount of houses I applied for. But I didn't let it get me down, as I was still hopeful. A couple of months later, I received a letter from the council saying we had no permission to reside in the house I was staying in with my children, my family home. I went to a meeting with the council, and they basically said I needed to find somewhere else to live as the house was classed as overcrowded. My family had no problem with us being there. We made it work, but the council was adamant that I had to leave. I then had to present myself to Parkgate Street as homeless with my children. The council would rather a family be homeless than stay with family. A year with 3 children and my partner in one room really takes its toll. My relationship has broken down due to the stress of us all being in the one room. We've decided to separate now for the sake of the children, as it's all too much. No couple should be in those circumstances for long, especially with children.
Going into my final year in college, I knew finding accommodation was going to be a terror. In second year, we'd been kicked out of our house of 8 bedrooms, so it could be turned into a language school. 8 beds of €500 each soon became 32 bunk beds of €600 each. I eventually ended up securing a room far outside the city in a house with 6 others. I commuted back and forth between work and college and work, sometimes not getting home until midnight. I thought it was terribly ironic that in trying to finance this room, I was barely sleeping in it. We finally got to summer and college ended, but the drama was just starting. One morning at 6 a.m, our landlord opened the front door and went straight back into living in the house. There was no forewarning, no explanation and no announcement. She knocked on the bathroom door when I was getting ready for work and told me through the crack. I was dumbstruck. This couldn't be legal. But apparently because she kept a bed in the house, in the living room, that we were all forbidden to enter, she had reserved her right of residency. My housemates were furious. I was woken up in the middle of the night by screaming matches and pots had been thrown in the kitchen. The guards were called 3 times to break up the fights. Eventually the landlord just said, "I've had enough, everybody, get out." She gave us a month to move, which was apparently more than we deserved.
I am a naturalized Irish citizen. I came here in 2002 to work and never stopped working up to now. In 2005, I met an Irishman. We got married in 2006 and we had a daughter. My husband was a very abusive man in every aspect: physical, mental, financial, and emotional. I suffered so much for the 11 years that I was with him. With the advice of a social worker, me and my daughter decided to escape from my abusive husband. That was in September 2016. We stayed in a women's refuge center for 5 weeks. My experience in that refuge center was a series of nightmares. Being homeless and a victim of domestic violence, I really needed help, but I didn't receive it there. I was even abused verbally by one of the staff in front of my daughter. I will never forget that experience. The staff in the refuge center was pressuring me to find a place to rent, but I just couldn't find a place to rent as everywhere was so expensive. I prayed so hard to get a place. Then, an old friend of mine agreed to accommodate me for a few months. I paid €350 per month in a single room in my friend's house. Me and my daughter did our best to fit in the single bed. After 3 months, my friend told me I needed to look for different accommodation because her relations needed to stay in her house. I was suicidal. I wanted to kill my daughter and kill myself. But because I was raised in a very religious family, I decided to go to church, and I prayed so hard. One day I went to my daughter's school. I told her teacher that I needed help, that I wanted to kill my daughter and kill myself. So her teacher rang the social worker. I got a support worker. She told me about Parkgate House and helped me to get on the homeless list. I had to go back to Parkgate
2-hour
House
journey
4
away
times
from my
before I got
daughter's
any
school.
answer.
We leave for
It was
school
really
at
hard.
6:20.
The irony of paying money
Before I
for a
had
piece of
to leave,
Return
paper
about 6.
that said they had no record of me
Some days
was
you
not
have
long.
But I don't know how much longer we can
I
live
was
like
getting very
this.
distressed.
Unable to enjoy summer because
I had
winter is
zero
just
money,
around
so
the
I asked my
corner.
parents for a loan for my rent,
And asked her to help me.
despite knowing I didn't even
2016,
last 5
I
minutes
found
in
myself
the house.
pregnant by a man who decided that he wanted to have more.
I just feel trapped. I wouldn't wish this life on my worst enemy. We're just a number to the council and are being left to rot in a hotel. All we want is a home.
Mid pleasures and palaces, though we may roam, be it ever so humble, There's no place like home. Home, home, sweet, sweet home. There's no place like home. There is no place like home.